this statement about SRC?
Since I'm in the dispatch table, let me just make... Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to support the statement by Senator Munyihaji Faki on the chair of SRC and on the serial misconduct by the chair and by the commission in gazetting guidelines for remuneration, Mr. Speaker, sir, that go way below, and Mr. Speaker, sir, would say, that are not in line with what the other state officers earn. I have looked at the Gazette notice, Mr. Speaker, sir, and apart from violating Article 27 of the Constitution, they are not only discriminatory, but they failed to do sufficient consultation to understand the work of the members of this House, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, of my concern is, for instance, the per diems for travel. Mr. Speaker, sir, those have been lowered without consultation. Was it that in the previous House they were better when they traveled? What happened to senators? Are there lesser senators in this session, the third Senate, than they were before? Mr. Speaker, sir, those guidelines are for rejection. And I urge that this be committed to the Committee on Delegated Legislation. And in fact, this chair should be put to explain why she did all that. These are acts, these are not violations, chair, simple violations. These are unconstitutional violations. And this is a chair that must be removed. This is misconduct of the highest order, undermines the very ethos of the Constitution. That's all, Speaker.
Senator William Cheptumo.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I chair delegated legislation in the National Assembly. And I think, Mr. Speaker, history repeats itself. Because there was a time when the former chair of SRC, Serem, behaved in a similar manner. And, Mr. Speaker, the Gazette notice that changed the entitlement of members came before my committee, Mr. Speaker, at that time. Mr. Speaker, the reason why the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013 was passed is to kill the very mischief we see today here. Mr. Speaker, the Act of Parliament provides for the establishment or the allowance of the CEO or the minister to make regulations. This is the power that the SRC chair used. But, Mr. Speaker, initially before 2013, that power was misused. That is why this House brought back the power to be able again to approve the regulations that are passed or made by a statutory body. Mr. Speaker, what happened at that time, my committee annulled that statutory instrument, the Gazette notice. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on Delegated Legislation has the powers to actually annul that particular statutory instrument. And I think, Mr. even before thinking of removing the chair,
because there is some information he's giving the House, so give him 2 more members, 2 more minutes, I mean.
Which I think is very important. Mr. Speaker, even before we think of removing the chair, which I think should be an option, this committee has the power to annul that Gazette notice, Mr. Speaker, on the basis that it is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the Chapter 6 of the Constitution, Mr. Speaker, allow me to go there. Chapter 6 deals with national values. And, Mr. Speaker, that article requires every state officer not to do anything in our responsibility or his responsibility that is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, anything infringing on the rights of a citizen, members of this House, of the other House, is unconstitutional. Mr. Speaker, I support this particular statement by our colleague. And I think, Mr. Speaker, for it to serve as a lesson, it is important that this committee, which has the powers, should be able actually to annul this statement. The Gazette notice. I have done it before as the chair. It can be done. And if they will not do, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, I can relinquish my position of chair security and become the chair of delegated, so that I do it.
Let us now get Senator Manzo Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was a member of delegated legislation in the National Assembly for 10 years, and now I am in the committee of delegated legislation here, and I've shared with our current chair and the deputy, and they have declared me as the people's chair. So I'll lead this process. I'll lead this process. One of the principles of law is that you can never be a judge of your own cause. This Gazette notice is signed by the chair herself. Her remuneration should have been done by somebody else, but not herself, and conferring a benefit to herself and her team. The other principle of law is that equity, which is fairness, is as long as the chancellor's foot. And therefore, this has been misapplied. There is no way she will go on to decide for herself, similarly together with making a judgment for herself. And again, the committee has power to annul. First of all, before they publish this Gazette, they should have approached either of the houses, either Senate or National Assembly, for approval. So they went on to make a law without permission of Parliament, the law-making body. And therefore, having not done public participation, automatically declares this Gazette notice unconstitutional, nullity, and again, there are quite a number of issues there, and therefore, so that I complete on time, the committee may then make recommendations for further action to be taken against the chair, being a public officer who is in breach of the Constitution. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I support.
Senator Mandago. I'm almost concluding this matter. Senator Mandago, then...
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, SRC as a commission, Mr. Speaker, has not been doing justice to salaries either of public servants or state officers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I say that because if you look at the salaries of the members of County Assembly, Mr. Speaker, who are the first line of response of public issues in this country, Mr. Speaker, the salaries are too low for the members of County Assembly to be able to perform their function effectively, Mr. Speaker. I say that, Mr. Speaker, because having served as a governor, Mr. Speaker, and realizing that this country, and in most parts of this country, the poverty levels are very high, a member of County Assembly, Mr. Speaker, on a single weekend will be handling not less than 10 arambes, Mr. Speaker. And people should never tell us arambes are not part of the functions of politicians, because these are needs of the populations we represent, Mr. Speaker. And there is no way a member of County Assembly will receive a citizen who is in dire need of facilitation to access hospital, or a very bright child from a very poor background in a very good school would perform well, missing school fees of 5,000-10,000, and you are telling us, Mr. Speaker, arambes are not the business of elected leaders. Mr. Speaker, I think SRC should review the salaries of members of County Assembly to a minimum of about 400,000, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the reduction of salaries of state officers by SRC while increasing their own salaries, Mr. Speaker, is in itself discriminatory. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, that this SRC seem to have an attitude towards state officers, and particularly politicians in this country, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we want to tell SRC that we perform a constitutional duty. It was not.
Give him 1 minute.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and the reason I say this, SRC in itself, Mr. Speaker, the functions they perform of salary review, the commissioners and the staff there don't actually do the job. All this work is always outsourced, and all the millions of money we put in SRC in the budget for salary review is actually for paying consultants to do the work they are supposed to be doing. Mr. Speaker, I support the statement, and where possible, that commission should be brought into review. And there has been a lot of mess in public service, courtesy of SRC, Mr. Speaker. There is a serious need to rethink the role of SRC in this country, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Senator Sosi.